Good evening. This is Nightly Muse with Jason Tweed. We're a few minutes past the 11 o'clock hour, so I'm hoping that you were able to join us. A little technical difficulties, but it seems like we are up and running again, so I'm real happy to see that, trust me. A few weeks ago, we had a conversation about there we go. Sorry about that. Having a little technical difficulties here. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about superheroes, and I started thinking about it. I thought, what does it mean to be a superhero? And probably the number one thing that you have to be able to do to be a superhero is you have to save the world. So I've identified 10 ways that you can save the world and make yourself your own personal superhero. Here we go. Number 1, save the world by becoming a beekeeper. You see, bees are struggling right now. There is a disease called colony collapse syndrome, and they don't quite know what's causing it, but many bees are dying, and it's becoming such an issue, and so many colonies are collapsing that it actually can create havoc with our agriculture. You see, every fruit and every flower, in order to produce said fruit, has to be pollinated. And the most efficient pollinators are bees. Of course, honeybees are our favorites because they make delicious honey. But just about every bee can pollinate. Honeybees are particularly good at it because they're fuzzy. And from what I understand from my scientist type people friends, that smooth bees like wasps and hornets are not as efficient at delivering pollen, but they do. But fuzzy bees like bumblebees and honeybees are much more efficient, and honeybees in particular happen to absolutely love fruit trees. So they are responsible by and large for producing most of the fruit that we have. If we were to lose bees, literally our food system could collapse. Not only do fruits and vegetables and grains feed us, but they also feed our livestock. So it would mean that the price of just about all food would go up substantially, and there may be shortages if we were to have problems, or if this problem continues with bees. Bumblebees, in fact, were just put on the endangered species list. So I would urge you, if you have the land, to create beehives and create bee colonies of your own. It's enjoyable and safe, but it's not for everyone. So we'll move on to number 2. Buy less crap. One of the things that we are challenged by is we buy too much stuff. We have become massive consumers. And in addition to buying stuff, we also are buying the packaging that said stuff comes in. And this is actually a bigger problem than the stuff that we like and we use, etc. all this packaging goes into our waste. And that brings me to number 3. Reduce plastics. Every piece of plastic basically survives in a landfill for roughly 1,000 years. And yes, you can recycle it, but the reality is if you take this plastic, grind it all up, you're turning it into new plastic, which is better than not having, or than disposing of it, but ultimately any plastic we buy has to have been produced at one point and will live essentially forever because it will far outlive ourselves and our children and our grandchildren. There are some new forms of biodegradable plastics that are coming out, but by and large, they really aren't used yet. Plastics get into our waterways. We've heard about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is, roughly the size of a state, and floating out there in the Pacific Ocean miles across. That's a problem, but there's another problem that could be even more critical, and that is that these plastics eventually break down, particularly in the water, but they only break down so far to the point where they become microscopic, and then they get into our food supply and our water supply. So it's come to the point where not only have we polluted the land, but we are beginning to pollute our own bodies. And ultimately that there's only so much that our bodies naturally can filter out. So at some point we're going to see the health effects of plastic ingestion. Next one is plant a garden. One of the best ways to avoid plastics is to grow food yourself. Now that's not for everybody. I'm a guy in a wheelchair. I'm not going to be out there with my hose in the yard, so to speak. But I can do my part by shopping for local foods. Shop at a farmer's market. Consume foods that are grown reasonably close, and do my best to limit the amount of travel and packaging required to get my food to me. There are two major deals about this. One is that we're very used to having fruits from around the world. We get pineapples from Hawaii, and we get bananas from South America. Bananas are the most consumed piece of fruit in the US today. And I love bananas. However, every banana has a voyage on a ship before I can eat it. Additionally, fruit goes to waste in massive amounts. So not only did your banana that you consumed come to you on a ship, but it came with a whole bunch of his friends, and chances are those friends just went to waste because a certain amount are lost in shipping by damage. We are of the habit of only buying the most beautiful looking fruit, and so we get a banana that's green at the grocery store. So we don't buy it, we buy the yellower ones. 3 days later, those are brown ones, and we dispose of them. So not only by shopping local are you reducing the waste of the food that you eat, but also you're reducing the impact of the food that you dispose of. Brings me to my next topic, become vegan. The reality is that vegan is the best way to live. Now, I'm a carnivore. I like meat. I love bacon. It's just part of who I am. I'm not going to become a vegan. It would be great if I did, if the whole world would become vegan. We'd be able to feed the world much more economically and efficiently, and we would create much less waste if everyone did it. However, let's face it, that's not going to happen. However, if you become closer to vegan, you save the planet just a little bit. So, by eating a little bit less meat, by consuming more fresh vegetables, and also by looking at what you eat and the ingredients and making choices. My daughter used to love gummy bears, but what she realized is that gummy bears have a gelatin in them that isn't vegan, so she doesn't eat them anymore. And the reality is, she's not really missing anything by not having gummy bears. So if we can look at the ingredients, try to get the freshest possible ingredients and the most animal-friendly possible ingredients, we are going to very slightly save the world. And remember, when you're saving the world in 10 different ways, a little bit in each way is really helpful. Ride a bike to work. Now, I specifically say to work. Lots of you ride a bike for exercise. However, you're not going to depend on it for your daily activities. In America, I was reading a study the other day that said America has by half the cheapest gasoline in the world. We pay about $2.50 per gallon on average, and the second closest is around $5 per gallon. In places like Japan, the gas prices are much, much higher, closer to $10 or $12 per gallon. So if we have the cheapest gasoline in the world, then it makes sense that very little of our income would be spent on gasoline. That's not the case, however. We spend a larger percentage of our gross domestic product on gasoline than anywhere else in the world. And when I say anywhere else, I'm talking about the G20 industrialized nations. So we have cheaper gas, and yet we use so much of it that we spend more money per person on gasoline than the rest of the world. The reason that is that much of the rest of the world has adapted to lifestyles of mass public transit and more efficient ways of getting to and from. Part of that is the expense. If gasoline is $12 a gallon, you're going to be more frugal. The other part is our obsession in this country with safety. Automobiles, the last 3 years running, every single automobile tested was given 4 stars for safety by the National Safety and Transportation Board, the NTSB. I didn't say that right, but that's okay, you get me. Even the more strict requirements that are 5 stars for the insurance rating system, almost every vehicle rated 5 stars, and every vehicle that came out rated 4.5 or better. So what that means is that we are obsessed with safety, and literally they don't produce cars for Americans that aren't absolutely perfectly safe. That's great, however, that comes at a cost. We spend far more of our money on safety features, and much of that safety feature has to do with the weight of the vehicle. If you make a heavy car, it's safer. There is a car that is available in China. It's a minivan made out of aluminum. It sells for roughly $4,500, and it gets 55 miles to the gallon. Now you'd be saying, why don't we have those here? And it's because essentially they're driving around in an aluminum can. Well, if you're driving around inner cities and you're delivering packages and such, that's fine. But here in America, it would never go. The risk would be too high, so we end up paying $35,000 or $40,000 for a panel van, and it's got a 5-star crash rating, and it gets 12 to 15 miles to the gallon. So riding your bike, particularly to work, those trips that you take very, very frequently, could make a huge difference. An alternative, if you live in a city, is to take the subway, take a bus, take some kind of mass transit that reduces the amount that you're spending on gasoline. Number 7, get vaccinated. Now, there has been issues with people not feeling ultimate faith in science, and vaccines have been one of the targets of this. It's senseless. It absolutely is senseless, because we have almost eradicated diseases like measles, mumps, chickenpox, and polio, and yet people still get scared of vaccines, to the point where measles has made a comeback. But even more important in my mind than those vaccines are the ones for influenza and pneumonia, because these kill millions of people per year, and they are viruses, so they adapt and they change. The vaccines don't last forever. Pneumonia, you need a vaccine about every 5 years, and even at that, it only attacks the most common causes of pneumonia, and it only is effective on about 50% of pneumonia cases. Influenza, they give you a shot. It's new every year, and it's a prediction of the 3 or 4 most common strains of influenza that they think will become a potential epidemic. Usually they get it right, but not always. There is this concept called herd immunity, and that's incredibly important. And we've seen it come to failure with pockets of measles that have cropped up, where not enough people in the herd were vaccinated against measles, and we end up with measles spreading. And measles is a dangerous disease. It has a very high infection rate, and for old people or for babies, it can actually be deadly. It's not only to protect yourself, but also you're protecting the herd, the group of people around you, because the only way that measles can spread is person to person. So if you're vaccinated and you're exposed, you're not going to pass that on to someone else who may not be vaccinated. However, if you're exposed and you get the measles and you pass it on, even if it doesn't affect you, it could affect others, and it could be deadly, particularly in babies that are too young for the vaccination. If for no other reason, get your kids vaccinated if you want grandchildren, because one of the side effects of measles can be sterility. So don't do it for your kids, do it for your grandkids. Number 8 is embrace science. we have been plagued by people who, for some reason, believe that science is a conspiracy theory. And it absolutely is not. For everything that science gets wrong, they get 10 more things right. For every answer they find, it opens the world, or it opens us to 10 more questions. Science is designed for one reason and one reason only, and that's to seek the truth. Now, some people have said that, well, there is vested interest in not solving problems. Pharmaceutical companies make money by not curing cancer, by treating it. And that is true to a degree. However, there is no money in bad science. And what we find, let's take climate change as an example. Lots of people doubt that humans are the cause of climate change. However, scientists generally don't. 100% of scientists believe that climate change is happening, global warming is happening. 97% agree that humans are the primary cause of it. The other 3% don't think that they aren't the cause, they just think that it hasn't been proven yet. And the studies that have indicated have come to a zero conclusion, which is a very reasonable conclusion in the world of science. Now you may say, well, there's money in this entire process, so that's why all the scientists are in it together. They get grant money, they get research money, they get to go play with polar bears. They have a vested interest in not telling us that there's nothing we can do about the climate. That's not true. The reality is, if any scientist came out and had definitive proof that something other than human interaction was causing climate change, they would instantly become the world's most famous scientist. Scientists become great and become famous and become wealthy based on finding truth, not based on hiding the truth. And science is also very competitive. So if the truth exists, then the first one to find it is going to be famous for that. You look particularly in medicine, the names that have gone down in history for new scientific discoveries are the hallmarks of what we think of modern medicine. So find people who embrace science and learn to love it, because the scientific process works. Brings me to my next way to save the world: fact check and seek the truth. Very, very few things are black and white today, particularly when it comes to politics, when it comes to science, when it comes to sociology. Should we ban guns, or should we keep the rights in the Second Amendment? Well, the truth is somewhere in between. It's not black or white. Should we how do we save the world? How do we reduce energy consumption? Should we all become vegans? Well, the reality is that all of those decisions have consequences. And while I encourage you to do some of the things we've been talking about tonight, I also want you to seek the truth to find out what the best approach is on a large scale. These are hints, but these are not definitive truths. However, if we're constantly searching for that, we are more likely to find it. When you learn something, check the facts before you spread it. We've seen horrible experiences lately where there is literally misinformation produced on purpose for the sake of swaying massive numbers of people to do one thing or not to do another. And that's incredibly dangerous. The last one I want to wrap up with is invite someone to dinner that is different from you. Now here's what I mean by that. I think we're going to do another show on this in the future, but ultimately there are some things about you that are different from other people. And you owe it to yourself and you owe it to society to experience those differences in life. Because often these differences are what divide us as human beings. But what you find when you connect with people who are different than you is the similarities are far more prevalent than the differences. So I figured that the best way to learn about these is to invite them to dinner, and here's why I say that. One thing that's similar to every person in the world is we all have to eat. Most of us eat every day. So if you have to eat anyhow, doesn't it make sense that something that you guarantee that you can find in common with another person is the desire to eat? So find people who are different than you and invite them to dinner. Spend a meal with them. Learn about them. Share your life with them. And my guess is at the end of that dinner, you will come to find that they are more like you than they are different from you. So if you're a Christian, invite a Muslim to dinner. If you're African American, invite a white family to dinner. If you are straight, invite a gay couple to dinner. There are lots of ways we can identify ourselves, and there are other people who are different than us in one way or another. But what we'll find is that they're almost always much more similar than we'd like to think. Don't do it every night. Do it once a year. And in 30, 40, 50 years, you're going to have met so many people and have so much more respect for your fellow human beings that you will become a better person, your children will become better people, and you will learn more about others and develop a compassion for others that is going to change your outlook on life. And if enough people do this, it's going to change the world. Probably save it. By the way, there is one other thing I want. This is like your bonus tip. To save America. The good old US of A. And that's to vote for superheroes. I've told you already 9 or 10 ways you can become a superhero. So start identifying those people who are willing to take on roles in public service and vote for them. Vote for a beekeeper. Vote for people who are minimalist and are focused on acquiring less stuff. Vote for people who understand that plastics need to be controlled in terms of the amount that we're using and casting off into our waste, and are dedicated to cleaning it up. Vote for people in your hometown that are active participants in local farming, want to promote local agriculture and local farmers markets. Vote for a vegan. Vote for someone who rides a bike to work. Vote for someone who understands that vaccination is important, not only for us individually, but also for society. Vote for someone who embraces science, not someone who rejects it or is skeptical. Vote for someone who seeks the truth and looks for nuances rather than looks for rhetoric or looks for black and white. Vote for people who embrace the differences between us as Americans and the rest of the world. And vote for people who embrace all Americans equally. That's how we're going to save America. I want to thank you for being superheroes, and join us again tomorrow night. Bye-bye.